Martin, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, look, I always like to start these with a bit of an introduction, just for anybody watching at home. Just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Okay. So I'm a financial services regulatory lawyer, but I focus in particular on payments, FinTech, crypto, anti-money laundering, financial crime. And my first love in law was what we call financial market infrastructure. So stock exchanges, clearing systems, and particularly payment systems. So that's what I do. I've been at several firms, trained at a Silver Circle firm. I've been at the Magic Circle,
Nice.
US Elite, and now I'm at Taylor Wessing.
Very good. And I actually saw on your profile that the very beginning, back at university, you were studying Russian. I mean, what was the inspiration behind moving into law?
Well, I picked Russian because it was my best subject and I really loved it and found it interesting. I was sort of vaguely aware that you could convert from another degree to law at some point and still be a lawyer. I'd always thought of law as a potential career. And then I got to the end of university last year and thought, oh no, I need one of those job things I've heard so much about. Like, what could I do? I looked at diplomacy or foreign service. I looked at journalism and I looked at law and figured out I just can't afford to be in London on a junior journalist salary, frankly.
Yeah, true.
The civil service stuff takes a long time to get through. And again, I just couldn't afford to do that. So I landed on law because I thought, well, I think the law is interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's academic, although maybe not as academic as I thought it was.
Right.
You know, I'm interested in business. I'm interested in doing things internationally. So I thought, well, I'll have a crack at that and got very lucky to eventually find a training contract. And here I am now, really. So no regrets. I'm glad I didn't study law. I'm glad I did something else. And there's nothing wrong with studying law if that's just what you want to do when you're 18 and that's your favorite subject and you're in a big rush. But, you know, we have a lot of people who have done something else. Maybe they were in banking or teaching, you know, medicine even. And I find people who've got experience of something else can often have a bit of an edge.
Yeah.
We talked about sales a bit before we started. Like anyone with sales experience, you know, it's so valuable because it's a really hard skill that lawyers learn quite late in their career. So somebody who's got that skill set early, you know, can really zoom ahead. Yeah, but that's how I ended up in law. And I came up when the financial crisis I was at university while it was kicking off. Yeah, and then I was in the recruitment market post financial crisis. So everything in the news and like chats in, you know, common rooms and all that was all about the financial crisis and what it meant. And that's what got me interested in financial markets. Like, what are they? Why did they go wrong? And then when I started my career, we were dealing with the fallout and the regulatory response. So that's kind of how I fell into financial services.
Great.
And my boss at the time was a payment systems guy, advising payment systems, stock exchanges. And that's how I found my interest in this particular area.
So is that more, as you say earlier, clearing settlement?
Yeah. So, you know, a stock exchange or maybe a derivatives clearing system, you know, central counterparties, payment systems like BACS, CHAPS, faster payments, card payment systems. That's what I started doing.
Yeah.
And then I branched out into payment services and crypto, AML, and all that stuff that, you know, sits around that. So we, as a team, do the very bottom of the tech stack in payment systems, the stuff that actually makes money move around the market, all the way to the top of a payment service that you or I would, you know, use.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that, I think you mentioned that you started off Silver Circle, Travers Smith.
Yeah. I trained at Travers Smith. Yeah.
Yeah. Qualified into corporate finance.
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
I very briefly qualified into corporate finance. Which I enjoyed, and it was and is a great team, and I still see some of my old, you know, bosses and colleagues. But I was just a rubbish corporate lawyer. I was always going to be a rubbish corporate lawyer. I wanted to do financial services regulation, so I qualified and quickly started looking for a financial services job, and ended up going to the Magic Circle to do that. But corporate finance just wasn't for me.
Yeah. Well, it's good. It's good to. I always think that understanding what you don't like is just as important as understanding what you're good at and your strengths as well.
Yeah, and it's really hard. It's really hard to figure that out because you go to university, even if you do law, there'll be things you've studied, but a lot of that, I'm sorry to say, isn't relevant when you're actually a lawyer in the city. You know, Roman law might be quite interesting, but, you know, funnily enough, there's not much demand for that sort of thing. So no, trying to figure out do I want to be a solicitor or a barrister is hard. And that took me a long time to figure out. And then do I want to train at a big international firm, or do I want to train at a firm like Travers Smith, which does lots of international work, but is a sort of smaller team, and you get to know everyone very well. And then what sort of work do you want to do? You don't really know the answer to that until you're doing the training contract, because you have an idea of what litigation is or what corporate is. But until you've done it, it's actually quite difficult to know whether it's for you. So corporate finance was good fun, and you do interesting deals with really interesting, people. But I wasn't great at attention to detail, frankly. I didn't feel the thrill of getting a deal done. It's very up and down corporate, it's all hands to the pump, the deal's done, then it trails off a bit. And I just like the slightly more nerdy legal regulatory stuff quite a lot. So
cool.
There you go.
So Travers Smith, Silver Circle, moved into Linklater's Magic Circle.
Yeah.
I think most people listening, if they have just a peripheral understanding of the legal industry, would understand that Magic is quote unquote bigger and better than Silver. But I think that Silver in general is probably more profitable than Magic. I mean, what's the difference between Magic and Silver, having worked at both?
Well, I think in my day, Magic Circle was definitely bigger, more international. You'd probably work for, big multinational corporates a bit more often, and you'd have more chance to work overseas as a secondee or a trainee. And the Silver Circle tended to be a bit more focused on particular things and be really, really good at that. So Travers was and still is an excellent firm for private equity and financial services regulation, particularly in the fund space, cracking competition team, great tax team, whereas the Magic Circle would sort of do everything everywhere, and that scale probably did help with profitability. But I think that's changing a lot now because, Ashurst is now colossal as well.
Yeah.
Just on a big merger. So I think those distinctions are blurring a little bit. I'm not sure the Magic Circle as a concept is as useful as it was, because Slaughter and May and Freshfields are very different. They're both phenomenal firms, but, they're not a natural, pair that you would compare, whereas Ashurst is probably more like Freshfields than it is Slaughter and May.
Yeah. So where do those titles come from? I know it came from journalists back in the 90s.
I think it's the legal press from the 90s.
Legal press in the 90s.
Yeah.
Just more of a thing that came up. I mean, why? I don't suppose you know why it came about.
I think the Magic Circle were just perceived to be they were definitely the biggest I would expect. There was maybe some snootiness about them being the best at everything as well. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
And there were no big US firms at the time that had the global reach as well, I guess.
Probably not, right? Yeah.
They're household names now, but back then I don't think they would have been. Yeah,
and that's probably the biggest change in my career. So I qualified in 2016. So I started my training contract when I was in 2014, which isn't that long ago. But the market's changed a lot since then, and particularly the US firms coming in. So when I was looking at training contracts, if people went to an American firm, there was still a bit of snootiness about it. It was perceived that they were, lower quality training, maybe a bit more business minded, but not as prestigious as the Magic Circle.
Yeah.
Which was probably a load of rubbish even then, but that was the sort of perception. But there were certainly fewer of them. So Sidley, where I worked for a few years, had been in London for, it's been in London for 50 years now. I think it was 50 years last year. And White & Case had been there for a long time. I think Skadden maybe was one of the earlier ones as well. But there were certainly a lot fewer US firms than there are now. And now, US firms versus Magic Circle, I think it's really more which are the biggest international firms and which aren't is the sort of maybe more important distinction.
You mentioned earlier people coming from a non-law background. I think if you come from a law background, like the ideal team 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was having a good balance of really technical lawyers and salesmen as well. I think now potentially with AI coming up, the technical side of law isn't not important, but I think it'll become less needed because the technology can pick up the slack to a certain extent, to a very minimal certain extent as it stands now. So I think that looking for more commercial potential and the ability to become a partner and a salesman rather than just a very technical lawyer for most firms is becoming more important.
Yeah, I think that was sort of always the case anyway. I think people who made partner are either, frankly, very lucky in the right place at the right time. And I've been lucky to be in the right place at the right time in my career.
Yeah.
Brilliant technically. I probably won't put myself in that bracket necessarily. Or brilliant salespeople, or a combination of all three, which is really, really unusual.
Yeah.
I think, and maybe you're right. I mean, every business, and especially law, is still fundamentally a people business.
Yeah.
But whatever technology gobbles up, and I don't know how much of the work AI will actually be able to do sustainably. I'm just not qualified
It's hard to tell.
to opine on that. And it's hard to tell, right? We'll see. But I think the question is, well, however much it eats, what's left, and how do we distinguish ourselves on that basis? So I work for a partner at Sidley who is, a living legend, brilliant legal BD guy. And he would always talk about that as being the question, well, what's left? What sets you apart from our competitors or the technology? And why is it worth the difference in our fee rate compared to another firm?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the question. But I think you're right. The commercial understanding, what do you do about the advice, will probably become even more important.
Yeah.
I mean, we should be doing that already anyway, frankly, because it's not our job, despite what some colleagues might think, to give people long, tedious sermons on the law and, lectures on the history of case law, which we may find very interesting, but, the clients don't care.
Yeah.
That's the dirty secret. They want to know, okay, what do I do about this?
Yeah.
How do I do the thing I want to do to grow my business and to make money? That's actually our job as I see it.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple, you just touched on a couple of mentors there from previous firms. I mean, when you first joined law, Travis Smith at the very start, was there anyone that you looked up to? And throughout your career as well, who did you look up to and why?
Oh, yeah. So my first ever supervisor in law was a guy called John Reddington, who's still a partner at Travers in the corporate team. And he was just phenomenal. He taught me all of the things I was rubbish at, like attention to detail, organization. And he made sure I was doing that properly and was on my case when I wasn't. But he also, he taught me how to think about what actually matters and what the client cares about and how to cut through some of the noise. Great guy. And then Mark Evans was the financial services regulatory living legend, who was the guy for payment systems. And he taught me a lot, the technical side. I learned how the technology worked behind the scenes. So he was really important as well in my early days. Loads of great lawyers at Linklaters and A&O. And then when I went to Sidley, that was my finishing school. Like, I like to think I was pretty good technically. I knew the law, I knew the issues, I'd learned the drafting. All of those things need to improve throughout your career, of course. That's always something you need to work on. But what Sidley taught me was, again, what the clients actually care about, because they were brilliant at cutting through all of the noise. We need to know that. We need to understand that. We need to read all the things. But at the end of the day, the client wants a yes, you can do that thing. Or no, you can't do it quite like that, but you can do it like this instead. So Sidley was my finishing school there. And again, on the BD, a real education as well. So John Casanova was the payments guy I worked for, been a partner for a long time, knew everything there was to know about payments, and just had a great manner with clients. He was really good at getting in front of the business and not just the lawyers, and explaining to the business why what he had to sell mattered and how he could help. And he was just a lovely guy as well. And then Max Savoy, who is his, junior partner at the time, brilliant technical lawyer. He taught me a lot that I didn't know about payments and the broader financial services regulatory perimeter. He helped me polish my drafting skills. Just a wonderful technical lawyer. And then Leonard, who was the head of the Sidley regulatory team, who was a funds regulatory lawyer. He was just Mr. Business. He knew how to sell. He knew what clients wanted. He knew how to cut all of the fat out of advice. I mean, he is, for my money, the single greatest legal BD guy I've ever met. Like, he's just phenomenal. So my team are probably sick of me talking about him and the things I learned from him. But the thing about Leonard is he's right about everything, which is often quite annoying. And even if you don't want to hear what he's got to tell you, like, he was always right about everything. So I still stay in touch with all of those people. But I've been so lucky to work for the best in the business in my area, pretty much. John Casanova, Mark Evans, Max Savoy, Leonard as well. Very, very lucky.
Yeah. As I say, it's a people business. And I think being able to articulate very complex ideas in a very simple way to non-technical people is an essential skill that probably hasn't changed since law started, really.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny, Mark Evans, who was an incredibly good technical lawyer, he always told me, listen, you should look at Supreme Court judgments and see how they write them. And you expect them to be almost, Shakespearean tracts, flowery language, but they're actually very simple and clear. Like the subject matter is obviously complicated, but distilling the complexity into something people can follow and understand is actually the skill. I think with juniors, and I was the same, I think you feel a pressure to demonstrate how clever you are.
Yeah.
But the clients assume that you're clever enough to do the job anyway. So you'll see juniors err on the side of very complicated, flowery language, where actually the client ideally wants a yes or a no. That's the platonic idea of advice. You can never get quite there. So for me, it sounds silly, but if there are semicolons in a sentence, to go away and do it again. The cat sat on the mat is the level of drafting I think we need, because people want a clear answer and they don't want to read a long, complicated email at midnight or 3 in the morning. And also increasingly, a lot of our clients are functioning in their third or fourth language, which is kind of incredible, really. Yeah. But there's no point having needlessly complicated, flowery language. It just doesn't do anyone any favors. Nobody's got the time.
So, spend some time in the Magic Circle.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, differences between Linklaters and A&O. I mean, are they pretty similar or are they vastly different?
I mean, fundamentally, lawyers, law firms are full of lawyers, right? So there's only so different they can be. I thought, partly Linklaters team, we were regulatory, contentious and non-contentious people in the same team. So different skill sets, different personalities, a much bigger team.
So you were doing both in that time?
I only did tiny bits of contentious regulatory. There were people who did more of one or the other.
Okay,
Some people did a bit of both, but most people were one or the other. It was a very big team. I think it was the best team in the business at the time and probably still is. Incredible strength and depth, can cover all sorts of things. And I thought they were incredibly well managed. Martin Hopper, who's now, he's doing his own thing. He's retired from Linklaters. He was just a brilliant manager. He was interested in people management and he'd read and studied and thought about it. And he was really good with the people. He was a great lawyer. And then they just had all the, brilliant technical specialists in all sorts of areas. The A&O team was a little bit smaller, similar client base, and a bit bigger, and maybe had more of a natural hierarchy and very senior partners and, relatively senior and then junior partners. So everyone sort of knew their role. Whereas A&O people were similar in age and maybe what they covered was quite similar as well. So it was just a bit trickier to manage, I think. It was a great firm, great clients, and some really brilliant lawyers there as well. I mean, Bob Penn is, one of the other living legends in financial services regulation. And he was great at cutting through the noise as well. And I learned a lot from observing him and having chats with him.
So that's been your journey so far, which brings you to the present day. So currently at Taylor Wessing. I mean, why did you join? What's attractive? Like, what was the big sell?
Well, I always obviously knew a lot about Taylor Wessing as an outsider.
Yeah.
Fantastic at technology, great on commercial contracts, life sciences, VC, fast growth. So I always knew we had like a really interesting, slightly cooler client base than maybe a Magic Circle. They were really good at providing commercial advice because when a business is growing, they want to keep growing. That's what's important. So giving that risk-based advice and understanding the commercial realities, the market perception was always, Taylor Wessing are really, really good at that. And if you're in the tech space or you're VC, then that's a great firm, to have advising you. So I knew a lot about them. I had colleagues who'd been there or were still there. And then when the opportunity came up to go and be a partner there, it was just too good to turn around. I am a financial services regulatory lawyer, but most of my clients are either tech firms that do financial services or financial services firms that are really tech firms in disguise, like their core is technology. So I needed to be on a platform where I had people who understood technology contracts and IP and data protection. And, that's Taylor Wessing all over. So I was able to slot in quite nicely and add the financial services bit on top. But no, I've been there just over a year. The people are great. Client base is fantastic. I think the way their lawyers are trained to think commercially just makes things loads easier.
So you've been a partner, sorry, for just over a year.
Yeah.
Actually, this is how this came about. I saw you posting about, I've been a partner for a year.
Yeah.
These are the lessons I've learned. And to be honest, I remember thinking this is pretty novel, because most of the time when particularly partners are posting, it's more along the lines of, here's a 2-page article on a recent deal we've done, which obviously the deal is amazing, obviously very high value and all that kind of thing, but there's no personality behind it. Whereas your post was very much authentic, and this is how the first year has been, ups and downs. So how has the first year as a partner been?
It's very up and down being a partner, I think. So I really wanted to be a partner. I thought I was ready. I thought I could handle it technically. And I've been lucky that my boss at Sidley was on parental leave, which meant I had to step into his shoes, sort of. I was obviously very well looked after by the actual proper partners.
Yeah.
But that was almost like a dress rehearsal. It's very up and down, much more than I thought it would be. Sometimes you think, oh, I'm brilliant. This is great. We're doing so well. Look at me. And then the next day you think, oh my God, I'm hopeless. And where's the work coming from? So that took me a bit by surprise. The other thing I was sort of expecting, but is harder to deal with when you're actually doing it, is all of the other stuff. Because the weird thing about law firms is you like to think you get made partner because you're a half decent lawyer and hopefully a half decent salesperson as well. And then it's suddenly your job to look at budgets and marketing and PR and all the HR stuff, which you may be completely hopeless at and you've never really been trained to do. So it is a funny business where the partners are basically in charge of everything.
Yeah.
So that takes a lot of getting used to, and you learn lots of things the hard way. You get things wrong. So yeah, up and down, very interesting, challenging. It's more about managing your energy at my age than your time as well. Right. There's just so much to do. So I think trying to figure out what shouldn't I be doing with my time is actually the challenge. And that's probably the secret to success long term. But again, I've been a partner for just over a year. So what do I know, right? I'm trying to, sort of muddle through the best I can. But again, I've been so lucky to have really great mentors who've been partners for a long time and are just brilliant at it. So my strategy has been, well, if I just copy all of the great things they did,
it's probably not bad. Probably not a bad idea, to be honest.
Yeah.
So been doing it for a year, ups and downs. In terms of where the work comes from, then is it very much things are given to you, or is it 100% you have to go out there and get it? I mean, for example, I spoke to someone in litigation in the last episode, and he essentially said, to this question, I asked him, how do you get clients? And he essentially said, you have to be really good at litigation. You have to win cases.
Right.
End of. And then people will come to you, in as many words. I mean, for FS Reg crypto clients, how does it work in terms of bringing in business?
Well, it's a small world. Most of the in-house lawyers will know each other, or they'll know a hell of a lot of their peers. Lots of them will be former colleagues. There's quite a lot of turnover in FinTech. People move around. So I think all you can do is, do a good job consistently, be responsive, be someone that is easy to work with, who actually listens to what they're trying to achieve. And then hopefully they'll tell their friends and colleagues that they think you're half decent. So I think it's really that. You can go out there and you can do big flashy events and talks, and that helps a little bit, but it's really about the strength of the network. So most of my work comes from clients I've worked with for a long time, or people who have moved from clients I've worked with to a new client. But you live and die on what people say about you, I think.
Yeah.
The know-how helps, the presentations and conferences help, but the core of it is that network and doing a good job. You do a good job, they come back again, they tell their friends, and hopefully they keep coming back. Some work comes in from other teams, corporate deals where they need your expertise. But for my team at the moment, it's mostly stuff that we've brought in that, goes up and down depending on market conditions.
Yeah. Well, I say you live and you die on your reputation, really. So, again, from what other people have said, it seems like word of mouth reputation is one of the biggest things to do with it. In terms of events, then, I mean, just what kind of events do you typically do? Is that like sponsoring a crypto conference? I mean, what do events look like in your industry?
Yeah, some people are great at conferences. Some people are great at walking into a big room full of people and schmoozing and being charming. That's not me at all. So I prefer to do smaller events where we'll identify a topic that we think is interesting to various people.
Yeah.
And then we'll invite them maybe to a dinner or a round table lunch, and we'll sort of have a chat about it. I find it easier to do my BD in those small groups, one-on-one conversations or smaller conversations. Speaking on panels can be good. That can be interesting. But yeah, I don't do loads of conferences just because I'm not charming enough to work a room. But some people are fantastic at that. And some of my associates are great. Yeah.
It's a hard skill.
Yeah, but there's no point. I don't think there's any point trying to necessarily get better at stuff you're not very good at. Certainly at my age, it's better to lean into your strengths. So, the public speaking is something I've done a long time, and I've had, good mentors on that to hopefully improve. So doing presentations, training sessions, webinars, I feel quite comfortable doing. But there's no point me trying to walk the room in a massive conference center. It just would be very low return on interest for me.
Yeah.
But some of my team are fantastic at that. They can go into a room full of hundreds of people and charm everyone.
Yeah.
They're very good.
Yeah, I really don't think that's something you can teach.
No.
I think genuinely think people are just born with that. If someone was going to come to you, let's say law student, no experience of law at all, what is FS Reg? So just to a 6-year-old, what is it?
My 4-year-old has no interest at all in it, but I'll try.
Right.
I see my job as helping people in the regulated sector do what they want to do.
Yeah.
So clients come to us and say, this is our product or our service. Can we do it? Is the first question. Have we got the right authorizations or licenses or registrations that we need to do this product or service? If not, how do we do it in a way that is going to be compliant and avoid, potentially criminal consequences? So we see ourselves as an end-to-end service from initial idea for a product or a service all the way through to getting licenses if you need one, entering into partnerships with somebody who can provide that, license for you, doing the customer agreements, all the way down to, exit potentially. So that's not a very good answer, is it? But in a nutshell, it's telling people how to do the things they want to do in a way that's not going to get them into hot water with the regulators.
Yeah. And so you mentioned in the past, Magic Circle, institutional clients. So you've represented or been a part of teams that have represented banks. I'd imagine that maybe the work now is less institutional and more, who are your clients? What does a typical client look like?
Yeah. So when I was at the Magic Circle, most clients were big financial institutions, huge international banks, maybe big stock exchanges. But now my clients are either, really big fintechs or technology companies that have a financial services offering, whether it's payments or credit or something like that. It's a very different kind of advising.
Yeah.
The big institutions, they basically know what they want to do and how to do it. They want that verified. They want that checked. They want to know if they're missing anything. Often with the fintechs, you're dealing with, really brilliant lawyers, but they'll be covering IP and commercial and data and employment. They're not necessarily financial services specialists, and they're also so fast moving that they will take your advice and it actually matters and influences what they do. You can tell them something on a Monday and you can see them update the product on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
So that pace is very different. I find it quite rewarding. And you are closer to the decision makers because of the best will in the world. You can be the best reg lawyer in the Magic Circle. You're probably not talking to Jamie Dimon very often on a one-to-one basis. But as a fintech lawyer, you can actually be on a call with the CEO. That's very normal. And they will listen and ideally action your advice.
Yeah.
So you feel like you can shape the direction of the business. You feel you get to know who they are and what they do and what they want to do and what they care about really quite well. So it is a more sort of immediate kind of relationship. You feel closer to them as people and also closer to the business. And that's why in my space, being focused on what are you trying to do commercially is so important.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit more important than if you're advising a massive investment bank, because that's a big oil tanker that's very slow to turn and to change.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's so high growth as well. If you look at, other payment providers are available, but if you look at someone like Revolut, for example, the growth journey they've had in such a short period of time globally has been pretty impressive, to be honest. And I don't think you really get that kind of growth with institutional traditional banking.
Yeah,
So
probably not. No, I mean, there are loads of incredible stories like that in fintech, which is what makes it quite exciting. And they're also thinking about, well, what do we do next as well?
yeah,
So no, I consciously decided to move into that fintech
yeah,
space and
yeah,
to work with clients like that. Look, working for the big financial institutions is great, and we do that as well. But we tend to work with them if they want to do something new and a bit novel, rather than the business as usual day to day core business. So we might help them with something like digital assets or a new payments product, rather than the you know derivatives compliance
yes,
needs,
yeah, yeah.
something like that.
So you mentioned that you work with the client, help them, support them with regulatory type advice. Is that jurisdictionally constrained, or if a client says we're expanding into Estonia or the Bahamas, wherever it may be, depending on the clients, could you go out there and go and do that work, or you've not limited, but maybe more focused on the UK and more specific jurisdictions?
Yeah, well, I advise on European Union and UK payments and fintech and
Yeah,
crypto laws. But even more internationally, but particularly in payments and crypto, the products work a certain way at a fundamental technological level. So you can get quite a lot of the way there, because
yeah,
there's only so different the Pakistani payment services regulations can be from everybody else's, because just at a fundamental technological mechanical layer, it's got to work in a certain way.
yeah,
So I obviously won't advise on the detail of Pakistani or Azerbaijani law, but we can help them as subject matter experts and strategic or product counsel, and do quite a lot of the work. And then we can go to local counsel and say, are we missing anything? Is there anything else we need to know? So we do a lot of that international strategy expansion work as well.
So what's the kind of breakdown then? Like 80% UK and EU based, and then maybe 20% around the world. I mean, what's the split on that?
It depends on the clients. I mean, maybe if we take all the clients at a whole, that's about right. But some clients use us to help with their international expansion.
Yeah,
So often that's coordinating with local council, but it's not just being a post box. You're trying to explain to them what the product is and how it works and what the commercial aims are, and you're also trying to help them interpret local law potentially, because a lot of what our clients do is novel.
yeah,
And it isn't obvious, how the law applies to it. So based on our experience advising on English and EU law equivalents, we can help hopefully steer them the right direction, and hopefully get to the answer the client wants.
yeah. So I mean, I've personally worked with a few crypto bros in the
Yeah,
past. Some of them have been in their early 20s, and they are like,
yeah.
very, very young guys. I mean, do your clients' personalities differ? Again, I'm going to go back to institutional banking. I'm going to imagine just a slightly older, very professional, 20 years in the industry, moving all the way to crypto, where you have early 20s, swimming trunks, flip flops.
Yeah,
I mean, how does that differ?
it's very different. I mean, yeah, but that's right. We work with a lot of 24-year-old computer scientists, and they're incredibly intelligent, fast-moving people.
Yeah,
They're not necessarily lawyers. They don't necessarily know much about the law, and they don't care very
yeah,
much either. So trying to get them to, what you don't want is for them to see you as a barrier,
yeah,
as the big bad lawyer who just says no all the time, because that's dead easy and isn't helpful. The easiest thing in the world is to say, well, there's risk. Okay, great. How big's the risk? How likely is it to crystallize? So getting them to trust you takes a while, and you have to earn their respect, I think. They also, because they're so clever, they will often go and look at the law themselves, which is
yeah,
quite interesting. And I think it can be hard to explain to them, like, I know that's what these words literally say,
yeah,
but
yeah,
what they mean is maybe slightly different, and it has to be read in the context of this case or this
yeah,
precedent. So that can be a challenge, because they're used to black and white binary, it's this or
yeah,
it's that,
yeah,
and thinking scientifically, where the law can be a bit fuzzier.
yeah,
So try to explain to them why what the words say and what they think it means is not actually the right answer.
yeah, yeah,
That can be a bit of a challenge. But it's good, because they also challenge your assumptions. Sometimes they'll say, well, are you sure that's what the law actually means? You have to go, well, actually, I've never really thought about it like that. I've never thought about that particular bit. They do challenge things, I think, other lawyers might just take for granted.
yeah.
So it's very different, but I find it a lot more interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, as much as I was joking earlier, I think that stereotype of the complete crypto cowboy as that was maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I think the reality of that is we're long past that now. I think, you know, with adoption on Wall Street and stuff, we're definitely past that era. But it still does make me smile to see like 24-year-old guys absolutely killing it building a new product. So yeah, I can imagine it's interesting to work with them on a daily basis.
And I've noticed that change as well, because as I say, like, you know, you deal with 24-year-old computer scientists, but increasingly you're starting to see like proper finance people who'll be decades older, like on the boards and in the business. I think that balance really helps actually, because you need people who just understand how financial markets work as well as the technology people. But no, it is really interesting.
And I think it's probably the closest you get to institutional in crypto, but Coinbase, again, maybe 5-6 years ago, having issues pre-Donald Trump when regulatory, it was a pretty difficult time in the US, when it looked like there wasn't going to be any kind of permission to do crypto in the US.
Yeah.
They started bringing in a load of Morgan Stanley executive directors, like proper finance guys, and now they look like a proper Wall Street business. So, yeah, it's definitely becoming more institutional than it was before.
You've got to learn how to talk to regulators in a way they understand and doesn't scare them. Because I think one of the challenges with, you know, the crypto bros and ladies, as it were, is maybe less so now, but certainly in the early days, they really believe in this stuff, right? It's important to them, and there's almost an ideology that surrounds the crypto industry. You'd have lots of conversations of, well, that law's silly. Like, we should be able to do this. Like, why can't we do this? And it's like, well, we may or may not agree philosophically on what the law should be. But what I'm telling you is how the law is. And it doesn't actually matter what I think about it or what you think about it. It is what it is. And we can find a solution that works within the law, but you can't just ignore it because you don't like it or because you don't think crypto should be regulated. Like, unfortunately, it doesn't work like that.
And also, I think at that time, it was kind of in a weird middle ground of pre-regulation. So although there were rules surrounding traditional finance, crypto was a bit of a gray area. So I think people kind of pushed the boundaries with that and then found out pretty quick that you just can't do that. So it's in a much better place now. I mean, on the topic of crypto, I mean, what's, in terms of on the regulatory side of things, what's interesting, what's new? What's the strategy for Europe? I mean, are they pro crypto? What's going on there?
I think it depends, you know, which politicians are in power and you know, how well the economy is doing and all sorts of other things. I mean, you're right. When we started looking at this, and I've been advising on this sort of stuff for a decade, near enough. In the old days, it was, is this crypto product within the definition of a thing that already exists in regulation? Is it actually an equity or a bond? And then the regulators started introducing particular bits of regulation, so anti-money laundering and advertising restrictions, and slowly but surely, you know, turning on more of the things that apply to existing financial instruments to crypto. So Europe is quite close to the end of that journey with MiCA, which creates a pretty comprehensive regulatory regime for crypto services, and you'll be regulated in basically the same way a bank is when they're trading in derivatives or shares. So they're towards the end of that journey. The UK is now finally, hopefully in 2027, going to do a similar thing and expand our regulatory perimeter to catch all sorts of crypto services that look and feel a lot like traditional financial services. We're not quite there yet. So that would be the big story as well. Can the crypto industry bear the weight and the cost of being a regulated business? You know, stablecoin is probably the big one at the moment. You know, people are trying to find, you know, use cases that can be supported commercially, cross-border payments, maybe e-commerce. So there's lots of interest in stablecoin, but the regulators are always fighting the last war. So we're getting towards the end of the story on how do we regulate crypto, but what's next, and will a regulatory framework be able to handle it? You know, who knows? And that's what I think makes being a financial services regulatory lawyer quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
An agentic AI being plugged into financial services, people are starting to look at that already. Can the regulatory framework or the case law handle that? There's still lots of open questions that, you know, we get to grapple with as our day job.
Yeah. Well, as you say, I think working with institutional clients, obviously amazing, like a privilege to be able to do that. But at the same time, being at the forefront of regulation as it's being developed, if I was an FS reg or just a reg lawyer, that would be the ideal scenario you want to be in. You know, it's like being a goalkeeper for Sheffield Wednesday. You're always busy. So
Yeah, maybe. And it's a bit of both, right? Because I think they used to feel quite separate. You'd have the crypto people and the financial services people. I think they need each other because JP Morgan knows how to be a big global financial institution. It knows how to do compliance and liquidity and capital management. And the crypto guys might have the cool new technology. But I think plugging those things together has been the story of the last, 3, 4, 5 years. And I think that'll probably be the future as well. Partnerships between crypto firms and traditional FS firms. And, maybe this time, 5 years from now, Coinbase might look a lot more like JP Morgan and JP Morgan will look a lot more like Coinbase than they do now.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe one will buy the other. Who knows?
Yeah, well, maybe that's probably going to happen quite soon, isn't it? Yeah, it's interesting.
I really wouldn't be surprised. So, I mean, you mentioned AI there, and I think every conversation I have, we talk about AI. So, firstly, what's your personal experience of using AI?
Well, we've got various AI tools in the firm.
Yeah.
Some teams are great at using them, and they have the sort of task that lends itself well to automation. So, due diligence and crunching through disclosure exercises if you're a litigator, AI is already really effective at that. I think for teams that are advisory teams that are dealing in gray areas, it's a bit more challenging, but we're using it to, get through large amounts of information and pull out what we think are the key messages. We're using it to, fact check what we've produced versus underlying obligations. But that, for me, that's still a bit of a work in progress. In terms of the industry, they're always light years ahead, right? They're always experimenting.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of agentic payments products, in development or close to launch. Same in other areas of financial services. So for me, at the moment, it's more about, well, how does existing regulation apply to AI products? How would they work?
Yeah.
Within existing frameworks, what are the risks, and how can we help people build those products? But as I say, for me in my day-to-day, we're getting there, but we're still experimenting and trying to find ways to use those tools to their full potential.
Yeah. I think it's a bit of a trust thing as well. I mean, if the job of a lawyer is to read through documents, interpret the documents, again, from more of an advisory perspective, not necessarily AML, due diligence, just paperwork churning, fair enough. It could probably do that 100 times quicker and way better. But on the advisory side, if you type in, what does this document say? Give me a 250-word summary, and you rely on that summary, it can be quite difficult to trust the product if it's not 100% there. So future applications look very promising, but I think for now, it's probably going to stay in that box of just paper churning, AML, due diligence, just keeping things more efficient there.
Yeah, I hope it gets better at that. I mean, you're right. I think some people imagine that it's a thinking machine, but I don't think they are. I think they're a, what do I think the next word in a sentence is going to be machine, based on statistical models. And that is great for loads of things, but it's not obvious to me that that sort of technology is great for advising on those gray areas, because a lot of the questions we're asked are difficult ones and they're often novel. So there's no data to draw on necessarily. It's about experience and judgment, and maybe the technology will be able to do that eventually. Maybe it already can. I'm not an expert, but I think you're right. I don't think the days of lawyers are numbered just yet. Anyway, but it's a great, proofreading machine.
Yeah.
I often say, can you make this email I've done a bit less boring and maybe a bit clearer? And it's really good at that.
Yeah.
So I think we're still learning how to use it, but I don't think it's a replacement. I think it is an augmentation. I mean, spell check didn't put, PAs out of jobs necessarily. I think, we'll learn to work with those tools rather than be replaced by them, I hope.
Yeah. I know it comes back to, are we better off with email or without email? I'm sure in the 1990s, maybe late 1990s, when email first came about, people thought, this is probably the end of the post or whatever it may be. But it's just enabled more and more opportunities down the line. So as much as you can't see what's coming next, I think the potential is massive in terms of new opportunities.
Yeah. And the more data you can crunch through cheaply and efficiently might mean sort of counterintuitively that there's actually more work for deal lawyers to do. Because maybe if you're buying a company, you might have said, let's just limit it to these types of documents because it'll just take us weeks to get through them. But maybe now if it's easy to review basically all the documents, then maybe that actually creates more work for deal lawyers. So yeah, it's really hard to tell. But in my area, as an advisory lawyer, it is a bit trickier, and we're still learning how to get as much value out of these tools as possible.
And it still is very early days. I think because people use it so often, or I personally use it so often on a daily basis, you kind of get the impression it's been here forever. But
Right.
it's very much still in its infancy, 3-4 versions in. So there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, and I'm going way outside of my area of expertise here, but I remember we were very lucky at Sidley to go on a course at Northwestern, and we had a great talk from a professor who knew a lot about AI, and I think technology was his background, and he said, look, AI's eaten all of the data, all of the high quality data already. There's basically nothing left for it to eat. So where does the improvement come from? It either comes from more brute force compute, or it comes from much more sophisticated software.
Yeah.
And it isn't obvious that those other two things, that there's loads more improvements that we're going to see anytime soon. But hey, what do I know about that technology?
So something cool I have seen actually is I can't remember the proper technical term for this, but I think it's something like MSP. It's essentially just context. So for example, you and your team would have access to a data room with X amount of documents. You'd be able to read those documents, interpret what they mean, and then advise someone based on that. But you probably don't have visibility or care about documents in an IP team or somewhere else around the business. Again, I'm going to use MSP, it's definitely wrong, but this MSP system essentially reads every document at the same time and has all of the context within a business. So it's not pulling stuff from the internet that's common knowledge, it's pulling stuff from your data rooms that's directly relevant to your clients and then making interpretations based on that.
Yeah. I guess lawyers are quite likely to be neurotic individuals as well. So even if that system spits something out that looks credible, it's quite difficult for lawyers to say, well, to not say, I'll just check anyway. Let me have a look to check that's actually right. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see, I guess, won't we?
Yeah. Well, I say it's a very exciting time on the tech side of things. So just rounding off then, you obviously had a pretty impressive career up to date. I said you've had some pretty cool mentors you worked underneath.
Yeah.
What is the highlight of your career so far?
Well, I don't know if my career is impressive, but the people I've worked with have definitely been very impressive. Highlights. I mean, making partner is a natural milestone. You know, getting to work with, you know, John Casanova and Max Savoy and Mark Evans was, you know, a genuine privilege. They're the best in the business for what I do, and getting to learn from them and work with them and, you know, help great clients do really interesting things. Those are highlights. You know, we've done some great work with major fintechs. We've helped one build a global payment system. You know, that was a great project I've been involved with because, as I say, payment systems was the first thing I really looked at as a lawyer. It's still the thing I find most interesting. It scratched all those, like, I want to work globally and internationally itches. It's a fast moving fintech that, you know, can change very quickly and implement advice. So that project was great. But it's the people business. So getting to work with all of the really great people I've worked for and with, and not just partners, but all the fantastic associates and trainees I've worked for. And that sounds really corny, doesn't it? But, you know, that's why I still do it, I think.
Yeah. So, and I say you've been a partner for just over a year now. I mean, how does it work when you first become a partner? I mean, do you instantly manage a team, or do you just go from being a senior associate, title changes, and then after a year, the team grows underneath you, or like you start managing people from day one? How does that work?
You're probably already managing people as a senior associate or a counsel anyway. I joined Taylor Wessing as a partner, so it was a bit different for me because, you know, not many people knew who I was anyway. I hadn't worked them before, so it was a bit easier to step into that role. I imagine if you've been at a firm for a long time and people know you well, like stepping into a partner where you are suddenly somebody's boss might be a bit trickier. But yeah, it is a big change, and probably a bigger change than I thought it would be, because the day job, giving the advice, is very similar. I didn't get any cleverer when I became a partner, but one thing that is interesting is, I've always worked with great partners, and as associates, you felt, well, I know the answers, I can handle this call, I can write this memo. But I always knew that John Casanova or Mag Savoy or Mark Evans were there as well.
Yeah,
And they would
yeah.
catch mistakes I made. So when it's suddenly you and the client is asking you specifically what you think they should do, that takes a bit of getting used to. Like, oh my God, like you're looking over your
Yeah,
shoulder. Like, oh no,
yeah.
you're asking me.
Yeah.
So that takes a while to get used to psychologically. But you just have to take a deep breath and jump in, I think.
Yeah.
And that gets easier over time. And
Yeah,
you
yeah.
learn more, and you learn from your mistakes, and you learn a lot from general counsels and other senior lawyers in house who are actually really helpful behind the scenes,
Yeah.
sort of coaching you, and they're very generous with their time, general counsels and other, clients. And I think listening to them is the most important thing you can do, because I think lawyers, we like the sounds of our own voices, and we're invested in our own intelligence and ability. But often what we think is really interesting and important is not necessarily what the client cares about. So actually listening to them, not waiting for your turn to speak, but listening to what they're telling you is really important. And you learn a lot from that.
Yeah. Well, I say it sounds like you've had some pretty good mentors over the years, and I say you're there now doing it for people more junior than yourself. So
Well, I don't know about that, but I still have mentors, right? Because I'm a very junior partner,
yeah.
and I've not been doing this job as a partner very long. I know a bit. Don't know loads about being a partner, but I've got fantastic people at Taylor Wessing who've been partners for a long time, who I can learn from. So, the people above me, Sean is Sean Skelton's my boss, and Graham Han is the head of our team, and they're fantastic lawyers, they're fantastic managers. So I can always learn from people who've been doing this a bit longer and a lot better than I am. So that
Yeah.
never goes away.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you get to their level and there's not many people above you, that might be quite scary, but hopefully you've learned
Yeah.
enough by then. But
Yeah,
yeah,
but I think that's just more managing people at that point. Less client advisory work, more managing people. No, when you get that
yeah, I
high.
think there's another partner in my team, William Garner, who has been a partner a lot longer than I am and is very knowledgeable and experienced. So, I can go to him and say, what do you think about this? Am I getting the risk right? Am I missing anything? So for him, he's able to give me that technical, sense
Yeah.
check, which really helps. But a lot of the other partners will not know about my area, but it is about, managing people. But some of it's more, how would you handle this tricky discussion with a client? Or, have you ever been in a position like this? That's really valuable, because that's actually the bit that matters most, right? You should feel confident in your technical ability by the time you become a partner, and probably a lot earlier. But it's just that wealth of experience that they've got on running a practice and pricing work, or having difficult conversations about billing or how to do BD. I learn loads from, the much more senior partners at Taylor Wessing, but also my peers, other junior partners who, have a different perspective, or, have an interesting view on things. So you've got to try and suck up as much knowledge from other people as you possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I say being at great firms is a great place to put yourself around those people. So I say best way to learn is being around people. Yeah, as a piece of advice then for someone more junior to yourself, or even yourself as a trainee, I mean, what would be the top one or top three pieces of advice that you would give?
Yeah, I think get your network started and growing as quickly as possible, immediately. I think some juniors think, well, networking and business development is something I'll do while I'm a partner. But no, you have to, keep track of your peers at law school. Where are they going? What are they doing? Staying in touch with people. As big as you can make your network, the better, because there's so much value in it. And I think maybe the other thing is, worry less about, how much you know and how clever you are. That comes with time, and focus more on being curious about how stuff works and what matters in your area, and get as much time as you possibly can with sort of crusty old bastards like me, because learning from people who've been there and done that for a lot longer is invaluable. And when I was a trainee, I was lucky to have an uncle who was in the city who
Yeah.
introduced me to loads of his friends who'd been in financial markets for decades. And yeah, that was really valuable, because it doesn't matter how clever you are. Like, if you want a lawyer, if you're on death row, do you want the cleverest 21-year-old at Harvard Law School, or a 60-year-old lawyer who's been doing that work for 40 years? Like, I think I know what
Yeah.
I would want. So experience matters more there are no real shortcuts, but talking to people who have lots of it is really valuable. And people are much more generous with their time than you might think.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
very busy people are happy to have a chat and give you their advice. So yeah, get that network going. Try and get a network of people who are far ahead of you in their careers,
Yeah.
and try and be curious about things.
So people could obviously come to the Lawsy networking events that happen every
Quite.
month if they want to
Yeah.
come and meet people. But yeah, my 2 pence or whatever the expression is on what a good lawyer salesman looks like from the outside. I was trying to get a shareholders agreement set up and spoke to probably 10 different law firms, varying into lawyers in terms of seniority, how big the law firm was, all this kind of thing. The number one person that stood out was probably in his 50s, gave me loads of his time and straight answers as well. The junior associates I spoke to, as you mentioned earlier, very flowery language, talking about what could happen, what couldn't happen, with no real understanding of my needs or what I care about. The very experienced lawyer gave me more time than he probably should have done, and everything was just a straightforward, do this, do that, do this, do that. And it was very clear cut. But yeah, that's I think what people would value more than anything, just straight talking if you can. I appreciate things are very complicated, but if you can give a straight answer, that's what I really appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's hard, right? Because
really difficult.
you're taught at law school, this side of the argument, that side of the argument, and you're worried about getting something wrong. So you're drafting defensively, you're trying to add appropriate caveats, and that's important. Risk management is important.
Yeah.
You've got to give somebody an answer. And that's a big US magic circle difference, which is a bit of a stereotype.
Yeah.
When I landed at a US firm, lots of magic circle colleagues had also moved on to American firms. And when we all compared notes, it was that our supervisors would say, hey, this is a great memo, really well drafted. You've considered the right areas of law, but what's your advice? What are you telling me to do? But yeah, that's difficult because you need the experience to know what matters.
Yeah.
But that's why there are loads of us, right? That's why, you're not a junior doing it all by yourself. You've got a mid-level, a partner, and maybe an even senior partner to provide those judgment calls.
Yeah.
But trying to get into the habits early is really important. What am I actually advising the client to do? They don't want, me to recant everything I know about this area of law.
Yeah.
Because they just don't care.
Yeah. I think for lawyers as well, maybe it's difficult to say I don't know because there's so much expectation that you went to a really good school to learn a subject that never really has a yes or a no. Like what is the answer? I don't know. Like most people would never say that. I think the expectation is you're probably paid to know the answer. Or then maybe that's the kind of self-conscious thing that people are thinking. But yeah, I mean, if you can find out the answer, that would be a great thing. But
yeah, it's really, really difficult because you're getting law's such a strange business, isn't it? Because you're saying you should pay me lots of money an hour to read things you're perfectly capable of reading yourself, and you're at least as clever as I am, but I'm charging you because I'm, holding myself out as being a better reader of this stuff. And like it's a really strange business model in a way. So saying I don't know, it feels like it's undermining that, but I don't think it is, because if you don't know, there's no point banging on, because people can see you don't know. And I think you do earn a lot of respect by saying, actually, I don't know the answer to that. I'll go away and figure it out, obviously. Or sometimes, actually, you will be better served by going to somebody else who is an expert on that. I mean, we were in a pitch recently, and the GC asked me, can you advise on this particular piece of law? And I said, no, you'd be better off going to another firm for this. It's not really something we are experts in. And she came up to me afterwards and said, I was really impressed with your answer, because otherwise you would have been wasting my time. And if I had said, yes, we can do that, and then stuffed it up, then, that's really damaging to your reputation. So it is difficult. And the answer should generally be, I don't know, I'll go and figure it out. But sometimes it is more appropriate to say, I just don't know. And maybe it would be better to go somewhere else, because you're not doing your job if you're trying to wing it, I don't think.
It takes years to build up that credibility and, seconds to destroy it by overpromising and under-delivering. Just to finish off then, I mean, anything else coming up for you? I mean, what's exciting? What's next in your journey?
I will be interested to see how the stablecoin market shakes out in the UK. We've got our new crypto rules coming into force, relatively soon, hopefully 2027. There are still lots of things that I don't think are quite right, and I'd like to see them fixed before we get to that point. It'll be interesting to see whether the UK can actually become a place for crypto, like a proper international hub for crypto. And I hope some of the fixes I think should be made to legislation happen. I think that will really help. It'll be interesting to see how we get this right internationally, because you don't want very different regimes of crypto all over the world, which makes it difficult for businesses that are often inherently global to operate. So maybe there'll be more international cooperation, maybe a more standardized set of requirements worldwide. So I've got my eye on that. And then the AI piece, right? What's that going to do to my profession? What's it going to do to clients? What's it going to do to the financial services industry? What's going to go wrong? Because something is going to go wrong. And what's the regulatory response to that going to be? So yeah, there's I think it's going to be another very interesting decade in financial services, certainly.
A lot of very exciting stuff coming up.
Hope so.
Well, look, thank you very much for your time. And yeah, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.